Each year, at the beginning of the rainy season, the people of Yoro, Honduras, gather buckets, barrels, pails, and nets in anticipation of fish that will fall from the sky. And each year, for as long as anyone can remember, sardines have fallen by the barrelful. The shower of fish, as the natives call it, generally starts around 4 or 5 p.m. and is followed by electric storms and strong winds. The fish are left alive and jumping on a grassy plain southwest of the town. In 1833, lumps of a wool-like substance descended on miles of countryside near the French village of Montrous. Elsewhere, swathes of silk-like material and billowing threads have fallen, as though from a vast aerial haberdasher's warehouse. In many parts of the world, frogs and toads have also fallen numerous times, and in monstrous numbers. And so have winkles, worms, and even snakes. Blood has been seen dribbling or pouring from the sky. Beans and grains fall, and so do meat, muscle, and fat. Reports of these and many other kinds of skyfall have graced the pages of history books. They range in believability from the more or less acceptable to the downright incredible. And at the farther end of this spectrum are events that may well belong to another category of the unexplained.
Hey, all you strange observers and sky watchers, welcome back to your favorite podcast, That Would Be Rad, a podcast that majors in 80s and 90s nostalgia, comic culture, all things paranormal, and minors in retro video games, tabletop RPGs, pre-internet mysteries, and raising our kids to be half as cool as we were back in the 80s. I'm your host, Tyler Bentz, and this is your other host,
Woody Brown.
Hey, man.
Dude, I feel like we've just had our eyes to the sky for several weeks now.
We sure have. There's definitely there's a theme for sure going on.
Yeah. It's kind of like one of those things where you can't talk about one without first talking about the other. Mm-hmm. And so I am pretty pumped about the weird stuff, dude, that's coming from the sky.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is a topic that, it's known by a lot of things, but I guess as a blanket term, it's sort of unexplained aerial, I would say phenomenon, but it's that would lead you to believe that it's like a UFO. This is stuff that is that comes from the sky, whether it's, something terrestrial in nature, like, frogs falling, to what they phrase it as meat showers, which is a little weird, to, star jelly and angel hair and all kinds of crazy stuff. And it's something that, I remember as a kid being in all those books, especially a book that you have of mine right now, Woody, called Mysteries of the Unexplained. And books like that would have these just one-off accounts of all this weird stuff, 1917 in Wales, there was a shower of fish. It's just this bizarre kind of stuff that is really perfect. In my opinion, it's like the perfect high strangeness because there's really no explanation for it.
Yeah. And it's funny that you mentioned this book because, truthfully, a book that you probably have right by your bedside has some pretty interesting accounts of things falling from the sky as well. And so what I want to do first is I want to kind of focus on some of these things that seemingly are falling from the sky. Oftentimes that term is referred to as skyfall. Mm-hmm. Probably one of the earliest records of, mysterious or miraculous things falling from the sky actually occurs in chapter 10, verse 11 of the book of Joshua in the Old Testament.
Ooh.
So let me just set the scene a little bit here. The Israelites, led by Joshua, have kind of routed the Amorite army. Mm-hmm. And in a surprise night attack, they're basically in hot pursuit of these guys, okay? Mm-hmm. And here's just the verse here. It says, "And as they fled before Israel, while they were going down the the ascent of Beth Horon. The Lord threw down great stones from heaven upon them, as far as Azekah? What is that?
Hezekiah?
No, there's no Aya. It's Azekah. I don't know. My Hebrew's a little rusty. As far as Azekah, and they died. There are more who died because of the hailstones than the men of Israel killed with the sword. Pretty interesting there, right?
Yeah, really interesting.
And what's interesting is 2 verses after that, one of the most astonishing events in the Old Testament is described. The sun stands still until the Israelites have avenged themselves. Yeah. Now, that's interesting to me and kind of off topic a little bit, but the only reason I bring it up is because it's just a couple of verses later. And what the heck explanation that might be, I don't know, but a motionless, bright aerial disc makes me kind of wonder.
I was right about to get into I feel like, well, I haven't seen a ton of it, but like Ancient Aliens, I'm sure that that's been like sort of claimed to be like a UFO, which I mean, you know, if you see a giant, bright, glowing thing in the sky, like
that doesn't move.
That doesn't move. Those people would be like, oh, well, there's the sun.
Yeah, of course, you know, these folks' life expectancy back then was like, I don't know, 16, 17. So, you know, in comparison, they're looking at the sun, they're like, boy, it's a long day, huh? Mm-hmm. All right, here's kind of cool.
Really
this
cool.
is less of a sort of descriptive reference here, but in Judges chapter 5, verse 4, it says, Lord, when thou didst go forth from Seir, when thou didst march from the region of Edom, the earth trembled, and the heavens dropped. Yea, the clouds dropped water. So it's interesting to me because they kind of are specific to the heavens dropped, you know. So are they talking about the clouds and rainfall? Maybe, right? But listen to this. So in verse 20 of that same chapter, it says, from heaven fought the stars. From their courses, they fought against Sisera. So it's like things are falling from the sky. It just happened to coincide with some of these battles. What's going on here? In the first book of Samuel, this is also interesting, man, especially since, you know, coming off of, you know, several weeks of, you know, first talking about like Nope and Pray and then Thunderbirds. And now we're starting to get into like, I guess, we kind of come back to this, like how people interpret things that are happening during their time, right? And so this verse says, as Samuel was offering up the burnt offering, the Philistines drew near to attack Israel, but the Lord thundered with a mighty voice that day against the Philistines.
I say Philistines.
Against the Philistines, and threw them into confusion, and they were routed before Israel. So it's like, oh, check this out, dude. This is crazy. And the men of Israel pursued the Philistines and smote them as far as below Beth-kar. Then Samuel took a stone and set it up between Mizpah and Jeshanah and called its name Ebenezer, for he said, hitherto the Lord has helped us. In Hebrew, this is weird, dude. Not weird, but cool. The words Ebenezer mean stone of help. Wild, right?
That's really cool, yeah.
I mean, so like the falling of stones and stuff in a military context actually occurs a lot in the middle of the 6th century with like Rome. There's actually this explanation that's written in the book of, it's like a history of Rome. And it talks about in around 672 to 640 BC, an entire Roman state were kind of coming up on this mountain. And all of a sudden it just started raining hailstones, which the wind piled into drifts upon the ground and a shower of pebbles. Some of them explained it. And then they also heard a mighty voice issuing from the grove on the mountaintop. So there's a bunch like in Greek history and stuff. But then kind of later, and this is all kind of ancient history, and then we'll kind of move into more modern stuff. But, you know, reading more, of course, everybody probably remembers sort of, well, especially whenever you're thinking about like Exodus, right? So you've got accounts of fish, grain, frogs. The closest kind of thing of, or I guess the closest comparison to ancient history and frogs kind of falling from the sky, of course, would be like the second plague in Egypt.
I was about to say, are you talking about the plague? Right?
Yeah, the plague of frogs. which if you're following
Locust.
along, if you've got your student Bible, it's Exodus 8, verse 1 through 14.
Mm-hmm.
And, like the locusts in terms of like with this context is, less sort of fantastic to most folks because they got wings and they're flying around anyway.
Well, but I've heard that the reason that was so sort of, I don't know if miraculous is a word because it was a plague, but I think the big deal was that like that was something that would have never taken place in those particular areas. And so it was like they just came out of nowhere.
Yeah. Well, and I think also the volume of them, right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, again, man, like here's something that I don't remember learning about in Bible study, but it says a burning object fell into Lake Van, Armenia in 1110 AD, turning the waters red. Just like when the Nile turned red in Exodus.
Man, that's... Yeah. Wait, where is this?
In Lake Van in Armenia.
And when was this?
The year 1110 AD.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
I've never heard of this.
Yeah. Huh. Even during the reign of Charlemagne in the 9th century, they talk about an enormous block of ice falling from the sky. And I swear we've talked about that before. I mean, just at least mention it.
Yeah, that does. Something about that sounds familiar, yeah.
Most of the falls from the sky kind of in and around sort of ancient times actually have quite a few modern parallels, but a few are unique. As an example, there's no sort of recent counterpart that I know of. You might be able to kind of correct me on this, but in 1578 in Bergen, Norway,
the Bergens are coming.
Yeah, the Bergens are coming. That's why there was like this huge amount of large yellow mice that fell from the sky.
What?
Yep. And in 1579, like a year later, lemmings fell from the sky. Same place.
Now, what exactly are lemmings?
They're just like little rodents, dude.
I've heard of them forever. I mean, there used to be like
the game, right?
Yeah. But they were just like little, I mean, I guess they were like little like people, though. So I've never known like what an actual real lemming is.
They're just like, it's a small rodent usually found in one or near the Arctic in tundra biomes, So.
Interesting. So yellow mice, huh?
Yellow mice.
Wow.
This is the kind of stuff that you think of like whenever you think of like fire and brimstone type stuff. In June 1642, lumps of burning sulfur the size of a man's fist fell from the sky onto the roof of Lohberg Castle, 18 miles from Magdeburg, Germany. This is kind of interesting, and we're going to talk about this stuff later. But in 1652, a luminous meteor was seen to fall in Italy, and near its landing place, quote-unquote, star jelly was found.
Yeah, I can't wait until we get into this because it's fascinating.
Yeah, and I kind of want to just right now just kind of talk about a lot of these just to show and illustrate just how random and strange all this stuff is. So in 1665, in Naumburg, Germany, a fibrous substance resembling blue silk fell in great quantities. Just like I talked about in the top, it is kind of common for there to be like showers of like fish and toads. And the one I specifically talked about was in Yoro, Honduras, that I think the first account was, sometime in the 1800s. Every year, May or June, like a storm rolls through, there's a heavy rain, and fish are just like flopping and flapping around on the ground, still alive.
Man, that's bizarre.
In the 1970s, a National Geographic team actually went out to the area, having heard about it, witnessed it, making it kind of one of the few sort of credible sightings of such a phenomenon like this. They did kind of, I guess, say in their findings that, they didn't have any proof that the fish were indeed coming from the sky, but any other kind of source sort of remained elusive. So needless to say...
They didn't see them falling. They just saw them.
They didn't see them falling from the sky. There's like a hardcore storm. When the storm like kind of dissipates and calms down and sort of fades away, so to speak, there's like thousands of these fish. And I mean, there's some YouTube videos and stuff where you see like people just kind of like not sweeping the streets, but kind of like push brooming these dang fish off of the roads. There's so many. And I mean, just this like animal rain, quote unquote animal rain, is sort of this weather phenomenon that has been reported around the world for, as we kind of have said already, but we'll come to know, like, for centuries, man.
So bizarre.
But it's also just like weird stuff. So like, and not central, like to me, the second that I kind of hear that, right, I'm thinking, oh, okay, well, a tropical area potentially. That's what comes to my mind just out of the gate. Some of the storms, just as an example, when I was a kid living in Indonesia, they're just mind-blowing storms, right? And so it's feasible to me that maybe especially if you live close enough to the coast, that there would be enough sort of whatever, we'll talk about some of the theories later.
You mean like with water spouts and stuff?
Yeah, that, and just like, man, humongous waves and stuff just pushing all that stuff up. I mean, dude, even when we were in Michigan, there were thousands of, the first couple of days, there was just, I'd say thousands, but I think thousands of these little bitty fish washed up on the shore. We had to find out later that basically they were just overpopulated, and those fish during their mating season, if there's too many of them, I don't remember exactly what happens or why, but essentially it's just part of their like life cycle. Dudes kind of die off after they mate. Which if you're gonna go,
that's the way.
You were gonna say something.
Sorry. Yeah. No, I was gonna say like, but I feel like that's a much sort of common occurrence, sort of like the red tide you'll hear of, or it's sort of what you're talking about, where it's like, a lot of times there'll be like sort of like cyanobacteria and stuff will have like a big bloom and
algal blooms.
And it'll become toxic to like fish, and so you'll start seeing all these fish in a certain area wash up on the shore, or like jellyfish in particular. I've been down at the beach down in Destin where, for whatever reason, whatever weird like biological sort of seasonal thing was happening, but like you just see like all these like dead jellyfish on the shore, and that stuff just happens,
Yeah.
But falling out of the sky,
or at least just like falling out of the sky is certainly different. But at least kind of like being there in a place where you're not really coastal.
Oh, right.
I'll give you an example, like, or a place that you wouldn't think of as coastal. So in a small village in Norfolk, England, small toads fell from the sky in such vast numbers that the locals were greatly sort of just like inconvenienced, I mean, it was reported that the villagers in 1683 had to sweep them up by the bucketful so that they would, burn them. I guess they were kind of freaked out and just were like, I don't know, we better just burn these things.
Also to note, these aren't in order. We're just kind of like throwing out.
Yeah, throwing them all out. These aren't, I mean, they're a little bit in chronological order, but not so much. Here's another interesting one, dude. Seeds of ivy berries were found inside hailstones that fell in England in 1687.
See, that's fascinating to me. I mean, it feels more sort of explainable, more sort of, but then at the same time, it's like, well, how would that happen? Because those hailstones form way up.
Yeah. The only thing I can think of is maybe, and I haven't, looked at the, I guess what the ivy berry seed looks like. Maybe it's one of those kind of seeds that in order to, spread, that's the point of seeds, right? Maybe they float in air, and maybe there was a storm strong enough to pull those seeds up into the atmosphere and really high and then freeze and then come back down.
But your ice would be forming like way up.
Yeah, I don't know, man.
Like thousands of feet up. Whereas those seeds, I can't imagine.
Yeah. I mean, and as you'll see, and as you'll see, Tyler, but also listener, as you'll see, it becomes like the simplest explanation of it, just, of just the biological sort of, this is how it happens, starts to become harder and harder.
Yes.
Or I'll say it becomes equally difficult to rationalize.
Right.
In 1696, a foul-smelling substance, the consistency of butter in the wintertime and in the spring, fell over large areas of southern Ireland. They called it stinking dew, which fell in lumps often as big as the end of one's finger. It was soft, clammy, and of a dark yellow color.
See, that feels like star jelly.
Listen to this. The cattle in the fields where it fell continued to feed as usual. According to Mr. Robert Vans of Kilkenny, The local people believed the butter was a useful medicine and collected it in pots and pans. This one's kind of cool, and it kind of leans toward like a possible explanation of all this stuff. There was this German naturalist Alexander von Humboldt, who traveled widely in South America, and in the Andes, he believed that fish were being ejected during volcanic eruptions.
What?
Yeah, so there were these earthquakes which preceded every interruption in the chain of the Andes, and they would shake like, just incredible force. And he says the entire mass of the volcano, the subterranean vaults are opened and emit at the same time water, fishes, and tufa mud. He says this is the singular phenomenon that furnishes the fish which the inhabitants of the highlands of Quito call piñadilla.
Which, that feels plausible, but like, I guess my question would be, well, how far away would they have been found?
So,
you know what I mean?
Yeah. So when the summit of the mountain, and forgive my pronunciation here, Carguarazo.
Perfect.
Carguarazo.
Yeah, it is.
Carguarazo.
Nailed it.
Anyways, when the summit of this mountain to the north of Chimborazo, it propelled, I guess, this like water and mud and everything 18,000 feet high. It fell, and in the night between the 19th and 20th of June, 1698, the surrounding fields, to the extent of about 43 English square miles, he says, were covered with mud and fishes.
I was about to debunk this and say, oh, that's just too far, but I remembered a little fact that I learned when I was at Yellowstone, where, we talked about underneath Yellowstone, there lives a supervolcano. And the last time it erupted, which was like, over 10 million years or something like that, it is said that it was so big, such a massive blast, that it actually sent ash and debris all the way up into, like, midway up Canada.
Yeah, dude.
So, like, it's possible.
Yeah, I do remember, too, not talking about Yellowstone, but whenever I was a kid, kind of reading about volcanic eruptions and stuff, and whenever I, again, lived overseas, we lived in the Ring of Fire. And, Krakatoa was a volcano that had erupted at some point and was still active. And there was, of course, a bunch of active volcanoes pretty close to Jakarta where we lived. And so being like the worrisome kid I was like, I'm going to read all about it. Well, anything that I read at the time, it's like, dude, it can spew so much ash and stuff into the atmosphere that it will affect weather patterns. Just all kinds of crazy stuff, dude. Lightning and stuff will happen in those, it's just wild, dude. It is just wild.
Yeah, that's cool.
Now, you can't talk about crazy stuff falling out of the sky without talking about angel hair.
Oh, I love it.
Now, I remembered the first time you ever told, I remember one time, and I don't remember where we were, but you were like, man, you ever heard of angel hair? And I'm like, immediately, you mean the pasta? That's what I thought. I was like, yeah, dude, it's okay, but I just prefer regular sort of spaghetti, but, angel hair is cool too. And you're like, no, dude. And you started telling me about it, and I'm like, So,
yeah, let me get into this. Angel hair is basically like a sticky sort of filament-like fibrous substance that is typically in connection with UFO reports, and maybe even more interestingly enough, sightings, like religious sort of phenomena. So like manifestations of the Virgin Mary, or like, for example, the miracle of Fatima, which was on September 13th and October 13th of 1917, along with the celestial phenomena over Nuremberg, which happened in 1561. It's like all these, obviously there's all these people sort of showing up to see these miraculous events happen, and associated with those events are, this filament substance sort of falling out of the sky, which is called angel hair. The other thing about angel hair, much like some of the other things that we'll get into, aerial sort of phenomena, is it typically always disintegrates or evaporates within a very, very short period of time, which means, people are like, oh, I got a whole bunch of them and like put them in my bag, and then when I got home, they were completely gone. Or I put them in an airtight jar and they were gone by the time, we even left the site. And one of the things that I did discover is apparently angel hair is really, it's like a big aspect of this UFO religion called Raelism. Have you heard about this?
Mm-mm.
I know this is a little off topic, but it's kind of fascinating. I've never heard of this, but what's funny is as I go along, you're going to be like, oh, wait a minute. This sounds like some of the stuff that we talk about. So this UFO religion was founded in France in the 70s by a man named Claude Varilhan, who is now known as Rael. Basically, the theory is that he is one of these sort of much like the prophets. So they sort of lump in like Jesus, Muhammad, Buddha. You know, they say that all of these people are like these prophets that are all descended from like the Elohim. And it gets big into that. And it gets into like, you know, it gets into like this, like all these prophets, like him, and he would be like the last one. And so it's like this whole deal where they sort of strive for like physical immortality through like cloning, and then it gets a little weird. But angel hair is like a big deal with that, and the reason why, and this is another theory among a lot of ufologists, which I've never heard of this, but this actually kind of adds up. It's this theory that basically the angel hair is created from ionized air, which is like sort of sleeting off of an electromagnetic field that surrounds a UFO. So if you listen to, if you're into like Bob Lazar and a lot of those guys, they believe that the UFOs are sort of their means of propulsion is that it sort of creates an electromagnetic field or sort of gravitic field, which kind of like it uses like the gravity on itself to sort of, you know, move, which would mean that like there would be no like sort of exhaust. I mean, as far as like propulsion, like a jet, you know, flume or whatever, you know, it kind of follows along with this sort of this universal property of energy use, where it's like there has to be some sort of waste as a byproduct of like propulsion or travel or whatever. So it's like, I think that's pretty interesting. It's kind of this idea that it's this sort of, you know, ionized air or whatever, kind of coming off.
Some sort of byproduct of that.
Yeah, right. Kind of like, you know, if you make a fire, it creates coal and soot, and it's like you have energy, and then you have like the sort of byproduct of that.
Yeah, and like we'll definitely put up some photos and stuff of angel hair, because like the thing is, again, like for the most part, like you said, like a lot of folks and stuff will kind of just either liken it to spider webs or even explain it saying that it is spider webs and stuff. One of the things I think, again, to your point, that kind of differentiates it from being just a spider web, which, by the way, dude, lately in the mornings, Woodrow and I have been going out and running before school.
Not again. Coming back?
Huh?
Are your spiders coming back?
No, we sprayed the house for that. But no, but they are in the neighborhood. I never noticed this before, but a lot of times we'll run into these spider webs that are coming from the tree, basically, to the road or something like that. And it's just funny that like we're talking about this now. And it's like this morning we were running and I was telling him about what we were going to talk about. And I'm like, I don't know, maybe this is angel hair. He's like, wait, what? He's like, I don't know what that is. So then I explained it to him. But it is very different. And keep in mind that one of the biggest sort of things, again, that differentiates it from a typical spider web is, like you said, where the disappearance of these strands.
Yeah.
You know, the fact that, you know, like you mentioned, people will kind of observe and report that they just kind of dissolve. And so there are, I mean, it is pretty fascinating, the things that spiders can do. I mean, honestly, like they can float extreme distances and stuff and create their webs and do all kinds of, you know, interesting stuff. But I think that difference in what it is that they're talking about is very fascinating to me once I started to dive into it, you know.
Oh, yeah. Well, and it's kind of like those trees. I feel like was it in Texas? It's like a specific kind of spider, and you'll see these trees that are just like from top to bottom, just covered in spider webs. I mean, it's pretty terrifying.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah. There's a species of spider, too, that we get here in the fall, not the Joro spiders. They're an invasive species that surrounded my house and only my house, for some reason.
Guys.
I mean, dude, it was like, I mean, literally, like our bug guy, like our exterminator, came in. He started just like taking pictures. He's like, dude, I've never seen. This is amazing.
Yeah. I mean, I think
I mean, the local paper got involved. It was,
it's crazy, dude.
I think it's because like we faced our front door faces east, our back door faces west. So like literally, we see the sunrise through the
window
front,
area. Get
a chance to like see the sunset every night, kind of through the trees in the woods. But for whatever reason, man, like our house was just covered in these things, like thousands of these spiders. But anyhow, there's another species of spider that you will see, especially around this time of year, going into October, our favorite time of year. Mm-hmm. And you'll notice like almost like a, I don't know, like a little, not globe, but like almost like a cotton candy version of a spider web on and in the trees. Do you know what I'm talking about? It's just wrap.
Yep.
And, I don't know. I just think the important thing here is like, yes, sometimes just like in anything, some of the things that people experience probably could be and are spider webs.
Yeah.
But then this specific stuff known as angel hair is just very, very weird, man.
Well, and sort of, like you said, there will always be, and really in all this stuff. I mean, once we get into sort of the star jelly stuff, it's like, obviously there could be some overlap with like frog spawn and that kind of stuff. But it's like my favorite account of like the angel hair, and I guess it's technically considered the most widely reported incident. This happened in Oloron, France in 1952, when they claimed that great flakes were falling from the sky, which was completely cloudless. A man by the name of Gennaro Lucietti and Pietro Lastrucci reported standing on the balcony of a hotel in St. Mark's Square in Venice, and check this out, it goes back to the UFO theory, and seeing two shining spindles flying across the sky, leaving a trail of the angel hair.
What?
That's amazing, dude. No clouds, no water spouts, nothing like that, and they see two spindles, which are shining spindles. That's a UFO, bro.
Man, I can't wait to get into some of the theories that explain some of these things. Now, before we hop into more modern stuff, I got to read this one, dude. This is crazy.
After these messages, we'll be right back.
This is Amy Poehler. My new movie, Disney and Pixar's Inside Out 2, is coming to theaters June 14th, and it's making me feel joy and sadness and anger, definitely some disgust, and I think a little fear. But I'm also feeling these new emotions like anxiety, embarrassment, envy, and ennui.
It's what you call the boredom.
Okay, that one was weird. It's going to be the feel everything movie of the summer. Disney and Pixar's Inside Out 2. Rated PG. Parental guidance suggested. Only in theaters June 14th. Get tickets now.
Hey, it's Kaylee Cuoco for Priceline. Ready to go to your happy place for a happy price? Well, why didn't you say so? Just download the Priceline app right now and save up to 60% on hotels. So whether it's Cousin Kevin's Kazoo Concert in Kansas City, go Kevin, or Becky's Bachelorette Bash in Bermuda, you never have to miss a trip ever again. So download the Priceline app today. Your savings are waiting.
Go to your happy place for a happy price. Go to your happy price, Priceline.
America's future can be determined by our dreams and our visions.
It was very intense, bright light.
For over 200 years, there have been reports of giant man-like creatures
from another dimension, another world. I don't know.
The most intriguing mystery on the North American continent.
Hey, this is Bryce Johnson from the Bigfoot Collectors Club, and you're listening to Tyler and Woody on That Would Be Rad, because that is rad.
All right, listen to this, man. On May 5th, 1786, it was the last day of a drought that had lasted all the way since the previous November. Okay? This is in Haiti. A quote-unquote, a great quantity of black eggs fell on Port-au-Prince. They hatched the next day, and some of these, quote, strange animals from the sky were preserved in a flask of water. Reportedly, the creatures shed their skin several times and kind of resembled tadpoles.
Yeah, that's bizarre. I mean, the one thing that those kind of events kind of remind me of, well, but again, that's in like Haiti.
Yeah.
And that's bizarre.
Listen to this one, dude, real quick, okay? Because now we're in America, and it's 1819. A foul-smelling object covered with a cloth-like napkin fell in Amherst, Massachusetts. This guy, Professor Rufus Graves, made it up, who removed the nap and discovered, I mean, this is straight from like an old 1800s annual, so he removed the nap and discovered a buff-colored, pulpy substance beneath it. On exposure to the air, this substance became a livid color resembling venous blood. The object was said to have fallen with a bright, brilliant light.
Yeah, that's interesting. To me, there's an element of that. I don't know. I mean, I feel like you're probably gonna get here, but I guess like now that we are talking about America, there's this thing known as the Kentucky meat shower or the Kentucky meat rain. Have you heard of this, Woody? It's kind of one of the more kind of famous ones, but this happened between 11 and 12 p.m. on March 3rd, 1876, where what appeared to be chunks of red meat measuring approximately 2 by 2 inches, with at least one being 4 by 4 inches, fell from the sky in 100 by 50 foot yard area near Olympia Springs in Bath County, Kentucky. There was a bunch of sort of explanations, I guess, like the big quote-unquote scientist of the day, which sounds a whole lot like our Thunderbird story. These quote-unquote scientists would come out, take the evidence, and then leave this ridiculous sort of explanation in saying that, oh, well, it was... And again, this is what's funny about this is something that... This is still an explanation that gets thrown out there when, we're discussing angel hair or star jelly or these weird sort of anomalous, occasions. But they say, oh, well, this is just a byproduct of vultures flying really high, and they get startled, and they all at the same time regurgitate all their meat. What? But the weird thing about this is, and this is the thing that doesn't quite make as much sense, is that when they sort of broke it down and started like really looking at the evidence of like, the meat and like, well, what kind of meat was it? It was never able to be really agreed upon what it was, because some people claimed that it was beef, others lamb, deer, bear, horse, and even possible human meat.
Sheesh.
So if you listen to our Nope episode, it feels a whole lot like that.
I'll tell you what else feels like that. In 1940, numerous silver coins fell in the Meshtchiri, fell in this region of central Russia during a storm of August 1940.
Wow. Huh.
Sounds familiar, right?
It really does. It kind of, as weird as this sounds, I mean, kind of like the guy that you were talking about, the big thing that was sort of covered in a napkin, I guess.
Yeah.
Opened it up, it's all sort of veiny and bloody and gross. But he said he saw, it came from like a light, I guess, in the sky. There is an element of this that feels like, and it's far-fetched and it's science fiction-y, but it feels like portals opening up.
Yeah, but dude, hold on. Write that down. Wait, because I don't want to talk about our theories yet.
Okay.
Because I think or I say theories, we'll just say possible explanations.
Right.
Let me take you to 1950. 2 police officers, Officer John Collins and Joe Keenan, were cruising the streets of Philadelphia. There you go.
There we are.
In their patrol car on the night of September 26th, 1950. As they made their way down a quiet street near Vere Avenue and 26th Street, their headlights picked up a strange, shimmering object that seemed to be coming to Earth in an open field about a half a block ahead of them. When they went to go investigate, their flashlights revealed a domed disc of quivering purple jelly. 6 feet in diameter, 1 foot thick near the center, and an inch or two at the edge. They had this like overwhelming feeling that this was something that was alive. They turned off their flashlights and saw it glow with a faint purple light. Then they radioed for help. They were soon joined by Sergeant Joe Cook and Patrolman James Cooper, too many names, Sergeant Cook suggested that they try to pick this thing up, but when Officer Collins tried to do this, it fell apart in his hands like gelatin.
Yeah.
Gelatin.
Mm-hmm.
The fragments that stuck to his hands, though, soon evaporated, leaving behind only a sticky, odorless scum.
Yeah.
Within half an hour after Cook and Cooper arrived on the scene, the whole thing had evaporated.
That's fascinating. It was like quivering.
They thought it was alive, yeah. It was like kind of, quivering purple jelly.
Yeah. And so that would go on to, this is sort of an interesting tidbit, that would go on to basically inspire the writing of the movie The Blob way back in the day.
Nice.
Which the film studio that made The Blob, which, by the way, that was like a big deal, back in the 50s. Apparently, a writer in 1953 by the name of Joseph Payne Brennan wrote a short story in Weird Tales magazine called Slime, which sounds a lot like Blob. And so he sued the film company over that. But the whole deal was like both of those events were said to be inspired by this sort of, this sort of organic blob or slime fell to the earth, and it was like quivering and glowing, and that's so cool, man.
Yeah, dude. And I mean, this is a perfect time for me to talk about sort of the rot of the stars, some people call it, or star jelly.
Yep.
So star jelly is one of the many names given to this gelatinous substance that's supposedly found at the place where a falling star has landed. Other old names for the same thing are star slough, star shot, and in Welsh, not going to try it. It just translates to the rot of the stars.
Yeah.
Since star jelly is usually said to evaporate before a thorough analysis can be made of, basically, since star jelly is usually kind of said to evaporate before somebody can test it and analyze it, attempts to identify the substance have sort of just been, conjectural, and conclusions kind of vary. What they all have in common, though, man, is that whatever it is, it has no true connection with quote-unquote stars.
Right. Well, but it's typically found following a meteor shower or sightings of like falling stars in the area, which is pretty fascinating.
I mean, one of the kind of common explanations for this is that it is potentially like a plasmodium, which is a general name for gelatinous slime molds and certain kinds of fungi. Which, when you start studying that stuff, man, there's some very strange known creatures and fungi and all kinds of stuff, microscopic organisms that exist. I mean, you and I will text each other like these weird, cool, creatures and stuff that exist in sort of recognized biology, I guess.
Well, the weird thing is it's not typically, it's not associated with a fungus or a type of bacteria. And the interesting thing is anytime there has been a sample, taken and there was any sort of bacteria found, it was kind of known to be, I guess the bacteria sort of began sort of growing on it after it wasn't associated with the actual slime or star jelly.
I think what some of these folks have said in this book, or like as explanations of what they might be, are like the two main contenders they said are basically like the nostoc and plasmodium. Nostoc is the blue-green algae that grows in bead-like strings with a gelatinous mass on soil, or sometimes floating in water. And colonies can be microscopic or as large as walnuts. And then the same thing, plasmodium is just like the congregations of slime molds or certain kinds of fungi. Again, interesting. Not going to go into what necessarily our theories are, but I think, again, just like I said with angel hair, hey, a large amount of what people witness and find could be that for sure, but there's other weird stuff.
Yeah, I love the idea that it's like there's something that just feels very like sort of dark and mysterious, and it kind of feels sort of cosmic horror, H.P. Lovecraft, when you hear terms like rot of the stars, and like it feels a little like Spelljammer.
Yeah, for sure.
It's this idea that like whatever's happening, it's like these like little, this slime and stuff is like associated with like Well, we'll get into the theories later, but it's just, I think it's cool. You went into a lot of the terms. Some people believe that it's associated with ectoplasm, even pixie dust. A lot of I forgot to mention this, but it's one of my, two of my favorite sort of titles for the angel hair anomaly it's also often called in Italian Madonna's Present, or the gift from above, which is really, really, really cool. Because, again, angel hair is associated with seeing UFOs or light phenomena or religious miracles. Mm-hmm. And then star jelly is associated with, falling stars and meteor showers. So it's like something is happening, I believe. I mean, and the fact that and they both carry the same trait as whereas I think angel hair evaporates or dissolves or disappears quicker. But, again, star jelly, they capture it, they take big lumps of it or whatever, take it to the lab, and almost always before the testing can be sort of complete, the thing's completely evaporated without a single trace.
So weird.
Which is really, really interesting. One of the things that I thought of that I didn't find this anywhere, and it's just something that we've sort of talked about with if you look at, if you're looking at the world through sort of a Jacques Vallée kind of lens, and it's there's all these sort of paranormal or the other, as Timothy Renner calls it, whatever all this stuff is, it's there's still this weird sort of universal protocol where we're never made to figure it out. It's the reason that nobody can find the original copy of the Patterson-Gimlin film. It's the reason that the Roswell crash, even though everybody and their brother saw it, or they were a soldier at the time, or they Jesse Marcel had a piece of the memory metal with him, it's it just disappeared off the map because the military got it. It's the Maury Island incident, which is another fascinating one that we're going to go over, that happened on my birthday, June 21st, 1947, where they see a UFO in the sky and slag falls out, some sort of molten slag, which ended up killing their dog on the boat in the middle of a lake. Whoa. And so it's just this. And so what I was saying about the Murray Island incident is it was the same week that the Air Force became its own entity. 2 pilots came to retrieve the slag, retrieve the material that was found, which happens every time. Mm-hmm. Men in Black. And what's weird about this is the plane, as they were heading back east with the material, their plane went down.
What?
They were never found. The slag was never found. There you go. It's like this. It's part of however we're created, whether it's a simulation, whether whatever. It's just this idea that we'll never get the answer. We're never meant to see the answer. We'll never figure out or wrap our sort of scientific arms around this thing because we're never meant to. It's it's always just out of our reach. Mm-hmm. So man, I don't know. I know it's trivial, but I think it's something that's really interesting, and it continues to sort of go right along with that theory of
for sure. And I mean, kind of like we talked about in the beginning, aside from the fish and the frogs and the snakes and the blood rain and all this, there's also things they talk about in the Bible, manna, and they talk about all these things, even in old folklore, where these miraculous things would happen that people would eat. I mean, some of these descriptions, and guys, I could go on forever with these little accounts throughout history where people find these buttery substances, or the village collects this stuff and then thinks it's magical and uses it as a medicine, and or they just eat it. And it's this is one of those times again where I'm I'm not gonna try some weird yellow jelly.
Yeah, but if you live back then,
no, you didn't really have a whole lot of options.
1400s.
You didn't have a Whole Foods.
Right, exactly. And I'm glad you brought up the manna thing, because I looked into that, and I've always been sort of fascinated with this, but it was said that, it's in the book of Exodus, as the Israelites are making their, exodus, if you will, out of Egypt. They ran out of their food supply, and then it was found one morning after the dew had evaporated. Upon the face of the wilderness, there lay a small round thing, as small as a hoarfrost on the ground. And so it's just like
what kind of frost?
HOAR.
Okay.
Hoorer frost.
Here.
But I think that's interesting. There's something about like it after the dew evaporated. It kind of like, I don't know. There's something about that sort of reminds me or makes it sort of lend itself to like a jelly or gelatinous kind of dewy thing left on the ground, you know. And that's what sustained them while they were.
And it's interesting, you know, like it's like, you know, at the time God promised Moses to rain bread from heaven to feed the people. And it's just like, man, I don't know. It's just very interesting, man. So throughout time, there have been all of these things, different things, whether it's a questionably edible substance or angel hair to sometimes even like hay, like almost like bales of hay billowing through the air, material, you know, like we talked about one that was like almost like purple silk, these strange glowing pulsating jelly, gelatinous things, you know, again.
Boy, but that was after UFO, right?
Yeah. Or after like potentially like a falling star, asteroid, maybe a UFO. There's the accounts vary. And, you know, the one thing they just have in common mostly is that once they get the jelly, you know, it kind of disappears.
It's slippery. It's very mercurial.
So I think we need to start getting into some of the different possible explanations. I kind of like in my notes sort of, I guess, subdivided the categories of theories, I guess. First, it's, again, all on the same level of strange. One, extraterrestrial, meaning this is stuff coming from like another planet. Two, supernatural. So maybe it is some sort of like
poltergeist type.
Yes, like throwing, I don't know, buckets of rocks and fish. Yeah,
whatever.
Something. Maybe some sort of time warp scenario. And in that, I would include also like
portals,
dimension kind of things. And then there's this sort of natural explanations, which are actually pretty limited to, I mean, I can talk about those first actually, so we can just knock that out of the contender here. But I mean, I say that kind of joking a little bit because just like we talked about with the volcanoes, I think there are some natural phenomenon that can happen that would potentially cause some weird stuff to follow suit. Like a lot of the time, whenever you look any of this stuff up, most specifically things falling from the sky, like animals and frogs and snakes and birds and whatever fish, usually you'll find it's either like water spouts or whirlwinds, extreme weather conditions, right? And so for those of you that don't know what a water spout is like a small tornado that forms over a body of water. Every now and then you can see, well, especially now with like YouTube and stuff, you can see videos of what a water spout looks like. They look pretty crazy, really.
Yeah, I've been out pretty close to one. They're pretty scary, man.
Yeah. What's interesting, though...
it's like a tornado on the water.
Yeah, it looks like a tornado on the water. Where it kind of is different is that water spouts actually don't suck up water into the air. The spout itself is actually just condensation. And so for that to be the explanation, it's like, that doesn't work. So that one's gone. Let's talk about whirlwinds and tornadoes. Yeah, they could have the ability for sure, especially tornado, to lift a small animal from the water even into the air. And they could be carried quite far. You know, I mean, gosh, tornadoes can, you know, level houses and they can throw cars a very, very far place, right? And some tornadoes actually have been reported to be capable of sucking up all of the water in a small pond. So, okay, that one coupled with the volcanic eruption makes sense for those areas. But, I mean, what about the raining of blood and flesh and silver coins and black eggs and yellow jelly and all
that? What was it? Yellow mice?
Yellow mice, yeah.
Yeah, well, what's funny is, and I thought of this earlier, is There's something about the water spout theory that it kind of reminds me of that like old urban legend where, there's a forest fire and then they find in one of the charred trees a dead scuba diver. Did you ever hear about that as a kid?
What is it now?
There was like a forest fire and they found a scuba diver that was dead, like way up in one of the trees.
Whoa, no.
So we used to think it was true. It was like a sort of an 80s urban legend that went around. And, so-and-so's uncle was on the fire department or whatever. And it's this idea that, like, I guess while they were in, like, such a big rush, they sent out all these helicopters that would drop into, like, a local lake and pick up their big buckets of water and then take off, And the urban legend is it went down and it picked up a scuba diver who was looking for wreckage or gold or whatever in a local lake and literally ended up dropping him into a, forest fire, which is kind of crazy. But there's something about that feels a little more like the water spout theory. Like I do feel like
they were able to identify this dude.
It wasn't true. It's a total urban legend. But the urban legend was that they were able to identify him and then they found out
it was Jimbo from.
Yeah, it was so and so's uncle or whatever. But it's that idea that like things are like with natural weather phenomenon. Like things are sucked up into the clouds sometimes, and not just with like water spouts, but just the way like sort of like condensation and. There are like sort of meteorological things that can explain, like frog spawn or things like that. But it's like once you start getting into like only coins falling or, meat that could have been a mixture of, horse, human, cow, pig, goat, deer meat. Yeah. It's like these are the things that are just sort of like, all right, you're not going to like, I don't care how scientific you say you are, you're not going to be able to explain that to me without having a better explanation,
Yeah, that is difficult, man. I mean, yeah, I don't know. And maybe it's like unfair for us all as non-scientists to kind of lump all of these together in the same sort of like quote unquote skyfall category. Mm-hmm. But, I mean, the thing is, so many of these things, again, if you take away, like, let's sort of take out the animals and stuff like that, quote unquote, falling from the sky, but all the weird stuff, right, that's coming from the sky, man, it just like you said, man, it's real hard to explain it as, oh, man, it's just a tornado.
Yeah, exactly.
Because, hey, we live in an area where there's a fair amount of tornadoes and not a whole lot of reports of, I mean, that would make the news.
Right. I think it's weird because once we started doing this, I remember my cousin Colt and we used to play, in these pastures that we had, like my extended family. We all sort of lived on the same road. We had a bunch of land because they were, farmers and had a bunch of horses and cows and stuff. And so we used to play in like all these pastures. And I like vaguely remember, for some reason, I feel like it was in the middle of winter, but I feel like we came across something like this, like a clear sort of like gelatin-like, sort of pile, like in the middle of the pasture. And of course, at the time, like I didn't know anything. I wouldn't have known about, star jelly or anything like that. But I feel like I do remember that as a kid, but, hindsight's 2020, like, if we would have known, like, it was just sort of like, oh, that's gross. And then you moved on. Yeah. But I think the important thing is this. Whether we're talking about, star jelly or even with angel hair, here's a couple things about it. There's no cellular structure. It's not a fungus. It's not a bacteria. It's been mentioned in literature since way back, since the Middle Ages, basically, all over the world. It's not particularly tied to any weather pattern. It's found in cities, forests, countrysides, wherever. It's been tested in labs for years and years with no definitive conclusion and melts or dissolves, before the tests are completed. But there is the one common factor that these cases almost always have, and they always, I say always, but most of these accounts, they're always found following a meteor shower or sightings of falling stars. And so there has to be something about this that's coming from above.
Well, both of those can kind of be explained by either extraterrestrial hypothesis or the supernatural theory, like gods, demons, spirits, and unnamed entities sort of being responsible for these. But
we will return after these messages.
There's something out there waiting for us. And it ain't no dead.
Hey, this is Woody.
And this is Tyler. And you're listening to That Would Be Rad.
And now, back to our show. You know, let me talk a little bit about sort of my newest favorite type thing, which is the kind of time warp or other dimensional or parallel kind of dimension type things here.
Okay.
So here's what I want you to think about. If things can kind of, let's say that like, for whatever reason, those parallel existences can like intersect. If they do, and we're kind of, for whatever reason, whether it's the thinning of a veil, a certain time of year, I'm not sure why, but for whatever reason, things are coming from that reality into ours.
Okay.
And it's just strange things, right? Then you could kind of theorize that simultaneously they're disappearing from there. So almost like a reverse skyfall, right?
Right.
Well, I started looking and it's like, well, I mean, does that kind of stuff happen? Well, check this out. So I read this account that was written about in the Times of London. I think it was printed July 5th of 1842, but it came from a Scottish newspaper where they described late in the afternoon this girl who was essentially washing clothes outside. That was her job, okay? It was a perfectly clear sky, calm air, nothing crazy. She is washing these clothes in this tub outside, and she heard this loud and sharp sort of boom overhead. After that, just directly after that, followed by a gust of wind that was only for like a few moments. When she looked around, all of the clothes, sheets, and everything else that she had kind of pinned on the clothesline were kind of like laying across this like long stretch of this field. They just got blown off and just were like in a perfect line. And then several 100 yards further, another portion of the clothing, which was mostly like curtains and smaller clothing articles, were carried up into the air at an immense height and completely disappeared altogether. And at that moment of the report, which was preceded by this wind, the cattle in the neighboring meadow were observed kind of running completely scared and were so kind of terrified that they were like cowering. The cows kind of like came into like a little huddle group and were just like, you know, shaking and cowering together. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah, that's weird. I mean, to me, that feels like, and here's another episode that we're going to do, but it feels a little like some sort of like sky beast or like some sort of organic, you know, animal that maybe we can't see.
Yeah. And it kind of goes back to what we talked about when we talked about Jordan Peele and this movie Nope, where certainly had to do some research and or has a previous knowledge of this kind of stuff. Because listen to this, 1880, July 10th. It's an issue of Scientific American, okay? It says, Mr. David Muckle and Mr. W.R. McKay were in a field on a farm when all of a sudden, again, they heard a loud boom sounding what they described to be almost like a cannon. They turned just in time to see a cloud of stones flying upward from a spot in the field.
Yeah.
Surprised beyond measure, they examined the spot later, which was circular and about 16 feet across, but there was no sign of an eruption, no sign of anything that would indicate the fall of a heavy body there or any other stones, simply just swept clean in that area.
Man. See, it's like, what's happening? Like, what's like, is something like sucking these things up?
Is that a water spout? You see what I...
Yeah, the whole water spout thing only works, in my opinion, in very sort of specific cases.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think that, like, to me, I don't know, like I said, some things I think probably can be explained by simple scientific sort of, hey, this is what happened, blah, 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 blah. But it's like stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, is it a case of somebody mistakenly seeing, like, how do you mistakenly see stones floating straight up into the air? And then when you get to the spot where they came from, it's like perfectly clean ground. It's not like a pile of stones. In other words, oh, maybe my mind, you know, played tricks on me and it looked like they were falling, but they were really, I mean, looked like they were going up, but they were literally, but they were really falling, you know?
Yeah.
You know how your eyes can kind of play tricks on you? You know, you pass like or you look at like a propeller that's going and it looks like it's going backwards slow. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, what is going on here, man?
Yeah, I don't know, man. I will, again, leaning into that sort of, you know, Trevor James Constable Sky Beast idea. Apparently, like, he has some stories in his book, The Cosmic Pulse of Life, which, you know, we're going to get into. But there's this, like, account where I think there's, like, 2 pilots, and they end up seeing, like, this, what appears to be, like, a wounded, what looks like a jellyfish, like, extremely high up. And they say that it looks like it's almost a little like a cloud, a little bit like a jellyfish, but it's definitely sort of organic. And this is back in like the, you know, I think maybe 50s, but I think like around 40s probably. And they claim that like whatever this thing was like sort of wounded, and then you see like a bigger one coming down to sort of help the smaller one. But it says it looks like sort of like blood or like whatever it was, like however it was wounded. I don't know the details, and I promise I'll do better when we have the full episode. But they said that as like the quote unquote blood was coming out, it would, you know, it was sort of shooting out, and then within several or like a, you know, maybe 100 feet or whatever, they said that they would see it like dissolve. And so this idea that this like star jelly, I mean, maybe these things are, I mean, above us and space basically is like, it's something like 100 times the length of like the deepest part of the ocean that we know of, like the Marianas Trench. And so it's like, how do we know that there's not? And I mean, even whenever, you know, we're flying like at very, very high altitudes and stuff, I mean, there's still a lot more as it goes up. And so it's this idea that like, well, maybe there are these things and maybe they are able to, you know, sort of fly on the wind, and it's this bizarre thing. But it's this, I like the idea that like angel hair and star jelly sort of has that dissolving or disappearing nature. And especially with that account from Trevor James Constable, where it's like they were seeing like whatever this matter was coming out of it was like just dissolving, you know? So maybe that's part of it. Maybe it's just like it's wounded animals coming out of the sky. But again, that doesn't explain, you know, falling coins.
Yeah, right.
That kind of stuff. That's like,
especially at that time in Russia too, because it wasn't like, because more modern accounts that you'll find, like I found one that like somewhere in Florida, I think it rained like frozen iguanas, and another place it was like tons of gold over this like interstate. Those, you know, like the gold over the interstate was like a plane that was carrying cargo. So like more modern times, it's like, oh, okay, that kind of makes sense. But you go back to the 1800s.
Right. No. You go back to the 1400s.
Yeah, where there's coins, though. I mean, you know, like stuff that doesn't really quite, it wouldn't be an airplane that dropped it.
Well, and I'm glad you brought up the airplane thing, because that's actually like the biggest theory that I remember like the debunkers having when I was growing up as a kid, you know, like looking at those books and like Mysteries of the Unexplained and stuff like that. They would always say, oh, well, the, you know, quote unquote authorities came out, or the scientists came out and said, oh, it was nothing more than like an airplane toilet, you know, shooting out its waste or whatever. But the thing is like, okay, well, if that's the case, then why did these quote unquote authorities, like, why do they always take these things away? You know what I mean? If it's just,
It's kind of like, I mean, that's how they explained it away in the beginning of Nope. It's just the plane flew by and just happened, you know?
Right, yeah. I totally forgot about that. But yeah, that was like a common thing, which even that I think has been somewhat debunked.
Yeah. Well, like we said, and that's why I love when we dive into this stuff, it's, you know, it becomes more and more easy to explain away things, I think, in the modern day, like, oh, that's fake footage, just really good, you know, computer graphics, or, oh, you know, maybe it was just a plane, you know, that kind of stuff does happen. Or, you know, people have seen weird stuff falling from the sky at night, and it turns out like it was legitimately like an old satellite or something like that. So that kind of stuff is easier to explain away nowadays. But when you go back and you start reading like history, right? At times when people weren't just kind of like copycatting stories because they weren't getting them from the other side of the world necessarily, especially like in the 1600s and stuff. We're talking pre-Morse code and teletype and ways for news organizations to share stories with one another. And maybe if it was just like one occurrence, in other words, if it was just in the Bible, and in that, it really only talks about, you know, stones and manna and maybe, I guess, maybe some other stuff. But then, okay, but like all of these things over centuries and centuries across the entire world.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Well, and that's what's I think is cool about, I like the idea that like in like poetry and even back in, you know, for example, a guy by the name of Sir John Suckling in 1641 wrote a poem which contained the following lines: as he whose quicker eye doth trace a false star shot to a marked place, does run apace, and thinking it to catch a jelly up do I snatch. And so it's like, you know, continues on in 1656. You know, it's like they're talking about like these falling stars, and it's like which are
even
found
like even that first line that you said though, dude, like the false star moving. So to me, it's like if I'm thinking about, well, what's he describing here? Well, sure, it could be a shooting star. Does he know what that is? He's, you know, or is it just some sort of like light that's moving fast in the sky, also known as UFO, orb?
Yeah, I know there's some connection too with, you know, once you start looking into, you know, this kind of thing on like the British Isles, like, you know, very, very old cases of, you know, finding star jelly, you know, where someone would see like will-o'-the-wisps and stuff like that. And, you know, so it's like, is it also associated to like orbs? Is it like you mentioned before, with it being like, okay, well, maybe it's an extraterrestrial type thing, or maybe it's a more terrestrial sort of paranormal type thing. And, you know, there is the theory, which I don't know that I believe, but there is the theory that it's almost like they're maybe like shapeshifters. I know it's far-fetched, but it's the idea that you always would find this stuff. And I'm not talking about like meat showers and the coins and stuff, but I'm talking about like these like sort of isolated little accounts of like people finding star jelly where, you know, they would find two little like puddles of this, or like sort of masses of this on like a walking path. Or it would not always, but it would a lot of the times be in like these sort of settings where it's like, oh, well, like somebody or something was like standing in the place of this. So it's like, again, is that the byproduct of some sort of, you know, energy use, you know, or, and somebody's like, you know, popping into like a portal, or is that like the way is that what they're able to shapeshift into? Like maybe they saw the people coming up on them. They're on the walking path, you know, boom, they're able to just turn into like a little, you know, pile of slime. And then,
which,
I mean, I know
it's a character in Dungeons and Dragons that you can play now thanks to Spelljammer, and that's called a plasmoid.
Oh man, that's cool. I wonder if it's like, is it like a sort of like a gelatinous cube?
Dude, it's like a what you're just talking about. It's like this gelatinous thing that you can kind of, it can change its shape into anything, including humanoid, so that it can wear clothes and stuff, but then it can just like, you know, come down into like a little ball of slime.
That's cool.
It's really cool.
Yeah. I like that a lot. Yeah, I think there's maybe a couple things at play. I think there has to be something happening on like sort of interdimensional level when it comes to, and I don't know if that's like a time-based thing, like sort of linear time, or if it's like just jumping into like, you know, or sort of phasing into like our timeline or our dimension, if you will, with like the coins and these just bizarre sort of random like things falling, like fish falling out of the sky. It's like, did somehow one reality kind of merge with the other? And it's like, well, maybe in that reality, it was...
These dudes are just seeing fish flying from the lake, just straight up into the air, and they're like, what?
Well, no, not even that. I'm saying like maybe like whatever portion of that reality, maybe it was just like a, you know, 20 foot by 20 foot bubble or vortex in the bottom of the ocean. And all of a sudden it merges into ours, and then all those fish fall down.
I mean, the one thing that I have not been able to find, and it's a shame too, with like the coins, they didn't mention in that old like 1800s write-up that the coins looked any different than what they were used to.
Right.
Same with like the fish. You know, it's not like on the streets of Honduras, there's not like, you know, hammerhead sharks or something that's uncharacteristic of the place. So that makes me wonder, well, does that mean that like anytime those moments where the realities are kind of either merged or there's, you know, that glitch or whatever it is, does that mean it's close enough to our own reality that like that's why it's somewhat familiar? But, you know, like, I don't know. It's just wild.
Yeah. And there's I know I keep bringing up the coins, but like there's an element of that also kind of reminds me of, you know, like folklore describing leprechauns and some of the fairy stuff where they would have like a hoard of gold. You know, for you fans of Neil Gaiman's American Gods, it's like they're able to like sort of produce at will like these gold coins and stuff. So it's like, I don't know, is there like a connection there? Like maybe for all we know, maybe that old, you know, folklore of like leprechauns being able to produce gold and like, oh, there's, you know, a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. Like, hell, for all we know, like maybe that was inspired by one of these things, one of these.
Yeah, that's a good point, man, for sure.
I just think that like, I think there's, you know, like I said, I feel like there's like multi kind of things at play. Like I feel pretty good about I feel pretty good about it. I feel okay about the angel hair being like a byproduct of like you know, the filament type stuff, like that sloughs off of like an electromagnetic field.
Yeah.
I think that's pretty cool, especially when you look at that one case where they saw two, you know, shining spindles, like sort of these flakes, these filaments were like coming off of those spindles. And it's like, that just sounds like UFOs, you know? There's an element of this too, especially with the angel hair that, and this is an episode, we'll do another episode, but it's like contrails or like chemtrails, if you will, where a lot of people are claiming that like they have like, this thing called like Morgellons disease. And I know a lot of the scientists kind of like, you know, just brush it off and say, oh, they're just, you know, it's some sort of psychosomatic thing, or they're just like making it up or whatever. But it's like, you know, there's been like these things that have been found where like they're like these hair like filaments that these people have like under the skin, and they're like extremely painful. And a lot of the cases they go to do x-rays and stuff. And when they're, you know, putting like the x-rays on the thing, it's like it can move, or like they'll just dissolve when they hit air. There's a lot of like little things like that feel like maybe that's, I don't know. So I feel like maybe that's somehow tied into a lot of that angel hair kind of thing. Which
is interesting, man.
Yeah, we'll get into that. That's a whole other episode for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, dude, a lot of different things that we have no good answer to.
Yeah. I think this is a good place to kind of wrap it up. But before we do, I got to say, folks, we're super, super excited because we've got now, September 5th, our Patreon that we call The Rabbit Trail is live. And so now, other than like all the random ways that you can support our show, this is the best way to support our show because of all the extra stuff that you get.
Yes. And it takes a lot of time, you know, it takes a lot of, I mean, for all you folks that, you know, may have your own podcasts and stuff like that, it takes a ton of time that At the end of the day, it's like we're spending in front of a computer, or we're
in the studio
recording.
or
whatever. Yeah. And, so it really does help us, and it helps us continue to keep doing this. I know in the past, like, and I'm guilty of this, it's like, oh, it's just sort of a money grab. But for us, it was more about like, well, I think the main goal of the podcast just in general was two best friends talking about stuff that we're interested in, and for posterity's sake, being able to leave it to our kids. And, it's really kind of taken off, and we have a ton of fun. But there's times where, maybe we don't want to stop the episode at an hour and 30 minutes, or maybe there's like a little more meat on that bone, and we wanted a place that we can just kind of unwind and relax and be a little more loosey-goosey and talk about it, maybe even more bizarre sort of theories and stuff. But before we leave, I know we got to go, so this is going to be very fast. But last week we talked about the cryptid, the Thunderbird, and I really had to bite my tongue because I knew that in the Patreon episode we were going to be getting into my favorite part of the story, and it's called The Missing Thunderbird Photo. And so we get into it heavy on the Patreon, so like please go check it out, because it's one of my all-time favorite things, and it's such a beautiful sort of piece of like American history, especially as far as like the paranormal goes and cryptozoology. But it's just like, it's one of those things. It's still unanswered to this day. And I just felt that like I really needed to at least like mention it on the show. Maybe you don't have the money at the moment, and maybe you can't hop on Patreon. Like, we get it. Times are tough. And so for you folks, I wanted to at least give like a little brief thing about it. So, and again, this is the very, very, very elevator pitch version of this. So it's this idea that all of these super famous investigators, the investigators that Woody and I are standing on the shoulders of, basically. The main reason that we have a podcast that we're able to talk about this stuff, it's John Keel, Ivan T. Sanderson. It's these guys that were, instead of just hopping on like a computer and looking at the internet for 30 minutes to get, to do like quote unquote research, these are guys that would like hop on a plane or hop on a train, fly all the way down, like Stanton Friedman flying all the way down to Roswell, New Mexico, and just going from house to house to house, asking if anybody had any family members that remember this. And so it's like, these are the guys that built what we're sort of continuing. And so there's an idea that all of these guys, I mean, not all of them, but like there's a ton of them that all remember this famous event that happened, where they remember seeing this famous photo of like a, it was called a Thunderbird that was nailed to a barn, and sort of like these cowboys were all sort of like either holding it up or standing in front of it with their guns or something like that. Some accounts, people remember like they were more like prospector types. And we get really into it with the Patreon episode, in the sense of like, there was an article that came out by a guy named Mark Travinsky, who's a great investigator. He wrote a lot for Strange Magazine and a lot of those other type magazines. And he did a big article on the missing Thunderbird photo for a magazine called Strange Magazine. And so we get really into that. We read a lot of that article because it's really fascinating. And it breaks down, the interesting thing is it breaks down like how all of these investigators have all these differing things, but they remember this exact same photo. But the problem is like the photo doesn't exist. It's nowhere to be found. People have scoured attics, yard sales, because some people believe that like, I think I saw it in like Argosy or True or Mail magazine back in the 60s. Other people seem to remember it from the actual article, which we get really into this too. There was an original story in 1890, April 26, 1890, of the Tombstone Epitaph newspaper. There's an article of these two cowboys that ended up being chased, and they end up shooting down a Thunderbird. And a lot of the people that remember this remember the photo directly from the newspaper itself, but then now you look and there's no picture. So all that to say, is it the sort of byproduct of just all these people misremembering. Because again, like I said, these are the people that are like the researchers. A lot of the, like, you know, Ivan T. Sanderson, he's one of the guys, he's the reason that like we have terms like cryptozoology and stuff.
Yeah.
And
so what's the likelihood of them just for misremembering?
Yeah, that's the thing, you know. And again, this was something that they were very...
get more into it.
Well, let me say that. So is it a matter of the Mandela effect? Is it a matter of just people misremembering? Or is it something maybe even a little more nefarious? And if that sounds interesting, go on over to our Patreon because it's fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
It's such a cool story. And honestly, you know, since the age of the internet, I feel like, the modern internet, like nowadays, it's something that's really kind of flown under the radar that not a lot of people know. Yep. And so, you know, I at least needed to mention it on the free feed.
because you were trying so hard not to last week when we were talking about the Thunderbird.
Yeah, it was so difficult. Like, you would say something and I would be like, nope, can't say it. But anyway, go check out our Patreon. It's going to be a blast. We're going to have a lot of fun stuff happening.
And at the time of this recording, you know, full disclosure here, we're actually recording this several weeks before the launch of our Patreon. So keep in mind that as we go along, you can get the updates of what we're going to include via, you know, our Instagram or our website or whatever. As of now, thank you. Since when you're hearing this, it should be September 5th.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you to anybody and everyone that has already signed up for the Patreon.
Absolutely.
And, you know, again, one of the benefits is that we're going to, of course, give everyone that's a part of it credit. It's just that we're doing this way before we even launch it, really. So
yeah, we have to, you know, some of this stuff we have to be sort of ahead of the 8 ball, if you will, because we got families and jobs and all that stuff. But anyway, if you want to find us, head on over to Instagram. If you would like to check out our new website, which has everything, has a way for you to record your own story if you want to tell us something cool or something that's like a localized occurrence that's sort of phenomenon in your area. You can do that straight from the website, and that would be radpodcast.com. Head on over there for, like Woody said, you know, episodes and a little bit of everything. It's really, really cool, and we're really excited about it. But for those that want to stick to social media, we're on Instagram. If you want to tell us about something, DM us, or you still prefer to shoot us an email, you know, you want to write an essay about a cryptid in your area, that would be radpod@gmail.com. Buy us a coffee. Tell one single friend about the show. It makes a huge deal, as well as giving us 5-star reviews on whatever podcatcher you have. That just continues to sort of push us out onto the masses. And we really appreciate you for it. We got anything else, Woody?
I think that's it, man.
Cool, bro. We appreciate you. We love you. And as always,
be rad.
That's the way it goes. My favorite song on the radio. time where I just needed some sunshine. You were already dead, for you became a ghost. You